Yes, we are. Thank you.
Great.
And Chair, we do have a quorum.
Wonderful. Good morning and welcome everyone to the February 18th, 2022 Sandag Transportation Committee. Before we get started, I want to make sure to share that we will be hosting simultaneous interpretation of this meeting into Spanish and want to introduce Ruth, our translator with Spanish language instructions. Ruth.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. I'll repeat the message that follows in English. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, por favor desplácese a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, que es el globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom en celular o tableta, presione los puntos suspensivos, luego Interpretation y luego el idioma. Gracias. To use the Zoom interpreting feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are located. Click on the interpretation icon, which is the world icon, and select English as your language. If you are joining using the Zoom mobile app on a cell phone or tablet, please press the ellipses, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, I'm going to ask our clerk, Ms. Francesca Webb, to confirm that we have a quorum. Ms. Webb?
Thank you, Chair. We do have a quorum.
Fantastic. I'd like to remind the members and public on our process for both member and public comments. The primary members will be using their cameras, and we will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or question, and then we will then recognize you. I'm going to ask our legal counsel, Ms. Amberlyn Deaton, to provide a quick reminder on how the public comments will work. Please, Ms. Deaton.
Thank you, Chair. As noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, in addition to emailed comments, the public may also provide live comments. When public comments are called for on an item, please click on the raise hand icon on the top right of the screen. The clerk will then call on you by the name you have provided. If you are participating by telephone, please press *9, which will raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak. The clerk will call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, which can be found at www.sandag.org. All comments, whether they are emailed or live, will be made part of today's meeting record. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Item number 1 is public comments, communication member comments. I'm going to ask the members of the public who wish to offer public comment not related to a matter on today's agenda to please raise your hand. And this is the time so that we can call on you. I think we have one. Are there any comments?
We do have one commenter.
All right, go ahead.
Mike Bullock, you are self-muted and you can go ahead and start your comments when you're ready.
Okay, thank you and good morning, Chair and honorable committee members. I've been seeing articles in the paper about the 9-mile stretch of carpool lanes that have opened up and about the start of new carpool lanes. And I'd like to remind members of Sandag, the board members and committee members and so on and so forth, that when we speak to the public, we have to be sure that we are telling the truth. And that has not been happening. People have been misleading the public about these highway expansion projects and the effect that they'll have. I want to remind people, I hope this is the Transportation Committee. We're supposed to know things about transportation. We're supposed to be students of transportation, and we should be thoroughly familiar with induced traffic demand. This is not a new idea. This is 40, 50 years old, and many papers have been written. It appeared in books, and it's been shown over and over again. Anything that you do to create space on the road will induce enough additional traffic to take that space up. And so if you add carpool lanes, then, you know, a lot of families will use that would have been in the regular lanes. They'll move over into those carpool lanes. And yes, occasionally you might encourage people to form a carpool. It's very rare, but that does happen. Many studies have been done on the effect of adding carpool lanes, and it does not violate the rule of induced traffic demand. In very little time, the congestion level will return. It does not improve people's lives. And that was a comment that was put in there by a supervisor. And the chair of the Sandag board made similar comments. It's going to improve people's lives. It's going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The opposite is true. And the reason is because when steady state conditions are reached, you will have the same congestion. So you're going to have more frustrated people than you had before. That they'll be just as frustrated. I mean, the congestion won't be worse. You're not making congestion worse, but you're making more people caught up in that mess. And the worst thing is you're increasing vehicle miles traveled. We have a climate emergency. No one seems to act like that. No one seems to really believe it going on the way they act. We have to reduce vehicle miles traveled, electrify the fleet, reduce vehicle miles traveled. Freeway expansion will not do that. Thank you.
Thank you, and Chair, that concludes the public commenters.
Thank you very much. Are there any comments from my colleagues, committee members? Yes, Mr. Gustavo.
Thank you, Chair Vargas. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to mention a couple of things that might be of interest to all of you. On February 7th, the governor appointed Director Tokso Mishaken of Caltrans as the Secretary of the California State Transportation Agency. So Director Mishaken will be transitioning shortly from Caltrans to CalSTA, and an interim director should be announced in the next few days for Caltrans. On the Clean California front, our district received 22 applications from 15 agencies for local beautification grants. So we are reviewing those applications, and we're hoping to have the results next month on the winners of those local grants. On the state side, last Friday, the governor announced over 300 million of state beautification projects. These are projects within the Caltrans right-of-way. And in that package of projects, there are 11 projects in San Diego, in the San Diego and Imperial County area in our district that go all the way from the border in San Isidro to Vista. They also include a park in Barrio Logan, improvements in City Heights, Ramona, National City, downtown San Diego. Some of the improvements include landscaping, active transportation, as well as art. So we're really excited about this. These 11 projects are a little bit more than $30 million of areas that are going to be turned from areas that don't look good to areas that will look great. So really excited about that. And last, I'll conclude with a couple of comments. I appreciate Mike Bullock remarks regarding the opening of the HOV lanes on I-5. I agree with most of the comments that he made. A reminder to the public is that these HOV lanes are part of a package of improvements on the North Coast Corridor that included also, and first and foremost, we did a lot of double tracking along the Lausanne Corridor, a lot of lagoon restoration, some active transportation, some of it that will actually be opening this spring. And yes, and the HOV lanes, the 9 miles that were opened just this week to encourage carpooling as part of a package of transportation improvements. And then last but not least, on Monday, we together with Sandag, we held a binational gathering in Otay Mesa East that included the representatives at the highest levels from the local, state, and federal government. It shows a commitment from the government on both sides of the border to advance this project that is going to improve the environment, create jobs, and also clean the air in the border. We're very excited about the progress that is being made on the Mexico side. I'm sure that the Executive Director, Ikrad, is going to mention it in his remarks coming up next. So I just want to share the good news with everyone. Thank you so much, and have a good weekend.
Thank you very much for that. Any other member comments? All right, seeing none. The next item is agency report, which will be provided by our Director Hassan. Hassan?
Hi there, Chair Vargas. I'm Ray Major. I'm going to be filling in for Hassan. Hi. Well, good morning, and good morning to the board members of the Transportation Committee. It's been a while since we've seen you last, and we're really looking forward to seeing you in person next month when we reopen the Sandag offices for board meetings. But things have been moving very quickly here at Sandag, and I'm happy to share that we've received the approval of the 2021 Regional Plan Conformity Determination from the Federal Highway Administration. And this means that the region is eligible for federal funding and that the 2021 Regional Plan is consistent with federal air quality goals. The next and final step for the plan is to receive approval from the California Air Resources Board, which we expect in either April or May of this year. Speaking of the Air Resources Board, we're also pleased to see them unanimously approve adding the international border communities, both San Ysidro and Otay Mesa, to the AB 617 Community Air Protection Program. Sandag has been working closely with the Air Pollution Control District and our community stakeholders for years to make this happen, and we're so happy for this opportunity to work with APCD and to help develop a plan to improve air quality. And we're also looking forward to working with Supervisor Vargas in her new capacity as member of the ARB board. Congratulations, Supervisor Vargas. On Monday, we hosted a bi-national summit for key officials from the United States and Mexico to mark the ongoing progress of the future Otay Mesa East port of entry. We were honored to have Lieutenant Governor and U.S. Ambassador Ken Salazar join us, as well as many of our local elected officials. 3 of our congressional representatives, Congressman Vargas, Congressman Jacobs, and Congressman Peters, were all there, including Baja California Governor Marina del Pilar Avia. And Hassan will be in Washington, D.C. next week to make sure that we secure funding to deliver the Otay Mesa East project on time and on budget. On Tuesday, as has been mentioned a couple times today, we had the ribbon cutting for 9 miles of HOV lanes from I-5 from Solana Beach to Carlsbad. It's as part of the North County or the North Coast Corridor project with Caltrans, and this is an important part of the Complete Corridors strategy in the 5 Big Moves program. And we also hosted a virtual housing policy forum to review current state and federal housing legislation, policies, and trends. This is part of the new Sandag housing program and efforts to support affordable housing production throughout the region. We are also continuing to work with Caltrans to identify funding to install the Coronado Safety Bridge, and we are having conversations with the state to see how they might help. Next week, we complete another milestone in our bike network. Sandag will be celebrating the completion of the 4th and 5th Avenue bikeways next Friday on February 25th with a ribbon cutting ceremony and an inaugural bike ride. And lastly, as you may have seen the notice for, there was a reorganization a couple of weeks ago. Following the departure of some of the Sandag leadership team over the past few months, we had the opportunity to identify a new structure that will position us to deliver more than 70 active projects and programs that we are working on right now. And as part of that reorganization, Colleen Clemenson and I will be serving as deputy CEOs focused on really shifting Sandag to a matrix-based organization that will allow us to streamline our work and encourage better collaboration across the agency. For those of you who know Hassan, he's very fond of quotes. And so he had a quote for this meeting. He said, as Steve Jobs once said, the people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do. And he was going to make the comment that he thinks that Colleen and I are just the right kind of crazy to lead our agency forward in the next year. And so, Chair Vargas, we look forward, both Colleen and I look forward to working with you and the board to get a lot of these projects done next year. And that concludes my report. Thank you very much.
It's a great quote, by the way. All right. With that, I am looking forward to working with all of you. Are there any public comments to the report?
Thank you, Chair. We do have one public comment. Mike Bullock, you can go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciated the two reports, and I really like that quote, because the fact is we need to change the world, and we need to do it before 2030. We need very large reductions in our emissions before the year of 2030. That should be our entire focus. Are we going to make that? Are we not going to make that? And I would say that, when Caltrans reports and when the director reports, they should always report on that project, the project of reducing emissions fast enough to stabilize the climate at a livable level. And why do I say that? I say that because this is a true statement. Human survival requires climate stabilization. And when I say climate, of course, I'm talking about anthropogenic climate. Climate's always going to change, but we have jacked up the atmospheric CO2 to 420. It's an outrageous number. We're not living on the same planet. And we are on a path to end most life forms. We're on a path to fail. We don't have much time. So we need to keep in mind what we have to do in the industrialized world. And I hope everybody knows exactly what that is. It's 80% below what we emitted in 1990. That's what we have to do by 2030. We used to think we could do that by 2050. That's the old 2005 situation. I mean, that was true back in 2005, and that's what S305, Executive Order S305 was about. And that's why that third target was 80% below the 1990 levels by 2050. But it's a changed world since 2005. The world has not reduced emissions enough. And so while we're still widening freeways, what should we be doing regarding freeway size? We should be reducing the size of our freeways. We have to be crazy enough to think that we can change the world in time to avoid total catastrophe. We have to try to do that. And we're not serious about it. I'm on the Central Committee Democratic Party, and I hear candidates talk, and their candidate speeches are just otherworldly. They may not even mention climate change. And if they mention it, it's in such an obscure and useless form that there is no emergency. In other words, we are just walking towards this climate cliff blind to the danger. And we're getting closer and closer, and we're just not acting like we're aware of what the climate scientists are telling us. They're not making it up. They are telling us what the physics is. And so these reports need to reflect that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Chair, that concludes the public comments.
Thank you. We're moving on to our consent agenda. If a member would like to pull the item on consent agenda, or if you have any questions or comments on that item, on any of the items, please let me know. All right, if not, I'm going to go ahead and ask Ms. Francisco, are there any public comments on the consent agenda?
Thank you, Chair. I don't see any hands from the public.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Sankey, move approval of the consent agenda.
Zito will second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Ms. Webb, could you call the vote, please?
Yes, thank you very much. The San Diego County Regional Airport Authority is absent. For the City of San Diego, Vice Chair Campillo?
I vote yes.
Thank you. For the County of San Diego, Chair Vargas?
Vargas, yes.
Thank you. For East County, Councilmember Mendoza?
Yes.
Thank you. Metropolitan Transit System is also absent. For North County Coastal, Councilmember Zito.
Zito, yes.
Thank you. For North County Inland, Mayor Ritter.
Ritter, yes.
Thank you. For North County Transit District, Councilmember Bob Patel.
Yes.
Thank you. For the Port of San Diego, Commissioner Naranjo.
Naranjo, yes.
Thank you. And for South County, Councilmember Sankey.
Sankey, yes.
Thank you very much. And those items do pass with those members present.
Fantastic. Moving on to reports, item number 6 is the fiscal year 2022 revised apportionment and fiscal year 2023 to fiscal year 2027 transit program and transit related revenues. I'm going to go ahead and call on Ms. Ariana Cerniden for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Vargas and Transportation Committee members. Good morning. I believe Jim Miller will actually kick us off and is also available. So, and then I'll finish it up. So Jim, do you want to go ahead and take it away?
Thank you, Ariana. Hi, my name is Jim Miller. I'm a senior economist here at Sandag, and I'm going to provide a brief overview of current economic conditions. And the headline for those current economic conditions is that COVID is still really controlling our economy. Real GDP growth for 2021 was 5.7%, which was the highest growth since 1984 and a really healthy rebound after our COVID-related dip of 3.4% in 2020. The Philadelphia Fed survey of professional forecasters expects a 3.7% increase in GDP in 2022, which is also pretty healthy. The labor market also saw significant upheaval due to COVID, with unemployment peaking at nearly 16% in 2020. It's down to 4% now nationally and 4.2% here in San Diego. In addition, employers have record job openings and are seeing record resignations as employees find better opportunities or drop out of the workforce. Wages are also rising, especially for lower income workers. So if the economy is growing robustly and everyone who wants a job has one, why is everyone seem so unhappy? Well, the answer to that is inflation. Prices rose 7% last year, which was the biggest rise in almost 40 years. And the rise was really focused on things we tend to buy a lot of, like gasoline, which rose about 40% in 2021. And inflation like this really impacts people's bottom line. And over the last 10 to 20 years, we've really grown accustomed to inflation of 2% or less. Again, the Philadelphia Fed survey forecasts lingering inflation of about 3.8% in 2022, which is down, but still double what we've seen recently. And housing prices here in San Diego have gone up about 20% in the last year, which really adds to the difficulty. Construction costs, which impact Sandag projects, have risen about 7%. Inflation is caused by both supply and demand factors. On the supply side, we have kinks really in every link of our supply chain. Production, particularly in places like China, which is still pursuing a zero COVID policy, is being impacted by shutdowns. International shipping has been thrown into turmoil. At our ports, you have traffic piling up both in the water and on the land. And domestically around the country, we have shortages of truck drivers and warehouse workers. Now, on the demand side, COVID has kind of shifted consumer behavior away from things like restaurants and hotels and travel to goods like home offices and home gyms. And coupled with generous federal income support, consumers really went on a buying spree that added to inflationary pressures. So you have supply down, you have demand up, so prices rise. In response to this, the Federal Reserve is taking a hawkish stance on inflation, suggesting that they're going to raise interest rates several times this year from their really near zero current levels. This will hopefully slow the economy a little bit to cool down inflation, but by raising the cost of borrowing. Now, Sandag could be impacted by raising the cost of borrowing, but I'm told by our finance team that we really don't have any exposure to higher interest rates. And in fact, higher interest rates could help us earn more interest on funds that we have in reserve. COVID impacts are also seen in Sandag revenues, like Transnet and TDA funds. So after a flat FY 2021, we are seeing over 20% growth in our revenues so far in FY 2022, which started in July. With this spike, we are revising up our FY 2022 forecast. anticipating an 11.7% jump for the fiscal year as a whole. For FY 2023, we're forecasting a much slower growth of 0.7%, with the expectation that buying patterns and inflation will revert to something closer to a pre-pandemic normal. This is an intentionally conservative forecast, but it does really get us back in the long term to essentially a pre-COVID level of revenues overall. The way we at Sandag get at this forecast, we have a two-step forecasting method. In the short term, up to 2 years, it's based on professional judgment of the Sandag economic and finance teams. We look at the receipts, forecasts from our vendors, and short-term economic conditions to come up with a short-term forecast of revenues. In the longer term, we use a consensus of 3 outside vendor forecasts for per capita retail sales, and then apply our population growth projections. This two-step methodology was approved in a peer review process in last January 2021. That peer review process included outside experts and Sandag staff that are not related to this project. This specific forecast, the one that we're presenting today, was put through the Sandag internal QA/QC process to ensure that there were no errors in the model and that the methodology was being followed. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ariana. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. So now that we've heard from Jim on his economic update, I'll share with you this item, which is the short-term revenue forecast. Today, we are seeking your recommendation of a revision to both Transnet and TDA related revenues for fiscal year 22. And then in addition, we're also looking for a recommendation of the estimated revenues for the period covering fiscal years 23 through 27. These estimates allow Sandag and our partner agencies to plan for capital projects and to determine operating subsidies. There's 3 types of funding that this item covers, and those are TDA, or Transportation Development Act, which is 0.25% share of the state sales tax. There's FTA, or Federal Transit Administration formula funding. And then there's Transnet funding, which is your local sales tax measure funds. And we bring this item to you every February because your action allows our transit agencies to plan for capital projects and determine operating subsidies. And then we work very closely not only with our region's transit operators to develop these revenue estimates, but also with the County of San Diego Auditor Controller per statute to confirm the proposed growth rate for these funds and to apportion the funds to support local agency and transit operator planning and budgeting efforts. For this year's item, we are happy to report that fiscal year 22 Transnet and TDA revenues are higher than what the board approved last February. As Jim mentioned, the Transnet revised anticipated revenues for fiscal year 22 are about $373 million, and TDA revenues are about $175 million. And while this revision reflects a significant short-term increase consistent with recent presentations at the board regarding the updated Transnet revenue forecast, we are still projecting additional funding will be needed to complete the program in the long term. In attachment 3 to your report, you will note that for each funding type, TDA, FTA, and Transnet, we include how much flows to the various sub-programs within those pots. And with your recommendation and subject to board approval, our transit operators would receive an additional $30 million in FY22 funding, and member jurisdictions an extra $15 million in FY22 funding over the previous estimate. Moving on to fiscal year 2023, the growth is forecast at 0.7%, so more of a tempering there, consistent with what Jim shared earlier. And Transnet revenues are anticipated at approximately $375 million and TDA at about $176 million. Some related items subsequent to this estimate that you'll see in upcoming months include the transit agency capital program budgets, Sandag's draft and final proposed budgets, and then local agency capital improvement program updates that are reflected in your regional transportation improvement program, or RTIP amendments. And then the estimates were reviewed by the Transnet Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee earlier this month, and they are scheduled to be reviewed by the board at its meeting next week. And then upon board approval, the estimates would be released to transit and local agencies for planning and programming use. And so with that, the recommendation for you today is that the Transportation Committee Can we put the slide up? The voting side. The Transportation Committee is asked to recommend that the Board of Directors approve the fiscal year 22 apportionment revision and fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 27 estimates and apportionments for Transportation Development Act, Federal Transit Administration, and Transnet funds. And that concludes our report. We're happy to help answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very thorough report. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this item, Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Terry. I do see one hand from the public.
Thank you.
Mike Bullock, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Those are great reports, and I assume you will approve that, and I would recommend that. But I just want to make a short comment about the inflation and how important the gasoline price is to that inflation. And yes, Jim Miller was absolutely right. We buy a lot of gasoline, and the price of oil is very high right now. And that's very bad for the planet, because what that means is oil companies will be tempted to do more extreme measures to get crude oil out of the ground. They'll do more extreme fracking. They'll do deep water, dangerous sorts of drilling. They'll do Arctic drilling. This is not a good news story. And Sandag and the other MPOs share responsibility for this. As you go forth blindly following a Transnet which was ill-considered. You know, people talk about promises made and promises kept. Those promises were made were terrible promises given the reality of our climate emergency. They were foreseeable, but you know, when that measure was on the ballot, it was before the public was nearly as aware as they are now, or they wouldn't have passed that. And so what happens that, you know, I think Sandag has a wonderful staff, but I'm not happy with the board. The board needs to redirect. They need to inform people of this change that we have to make, and that we have to change the Transnet. And if you have to go to the voters, that's fine, and tell the voters, you know, we should never be widening these freeways. We can't do that. We have to focus on alternatives, and pricing is something which I think the people you have working for you could do great work on improving the systems and the way that we pay for the use of roads and parking, road use charges, and unbundling the cost of parking, really good systems. And there's approaches that can do that, because we have to reduce vehicle miles traveled, reduce the amount of gasoline. We have to push down, and that, you know, by decreasing demand, the price goes down, everything moves in the right direction, and we have to do that anyway. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and Chair, that concludes the public comments.
Thank you. Do we have any member comments?
Madam Chair, can I jump in?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I think what all of our jurisdictions have seen, what the state has seen, and certainly what we're hearing in this report today is it's a wildly fluctuating set of expectations, and then what history tends to deliver for us. The news is great that the 11.7% increase in Transnet revenue is going to give us as policymakers a lot more options that we didn't have without that extra revenue. I'm encouraged that the longer term prognosis is significantly more conservative. I'm not being an economist, but being somebody who watches these wild fluctuations and gets nervous about the future. I appreciate that those good folks at the Sandag staff are acting in prudent and conservative manner looking forward. So with that said, I would make a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there a second?
Zito will second.
Thank you. Mr. Hall.
Yes, obviously these are estimates. What is the process or procedure if we don't make our estimates in revenue?
Jim, do you want to help answer that one, or maybe Andre?
Yeah, I think
You
it
know,
would be more of an Andre thing.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
don't know
at
that
the end of the
we get
day,
into that situation this time.
right. I mean, it would mean that we would have to come back to you, right, with another revision is what it would mean. So I don't know if that helps answer.
So let me ask the question a little differently. In our projections, how much do we hold back in reserves in case we don't make those projections? Understanding that other agencies are basing their their finances off of what we're stating.
So for that one, I am going to need Andre, I think, on the reserves question.
Yeah, good morning. Andre Dujon, CFO. So in the last 10 years, we've had one incident where revenues came in below. And generally for Transnet, recipients receive what we get. And hopefully we can make adjustments. And generally the fall that we had was less than 5%. For TDA, we do have a pretty healthy reserve right now. It's about 20%. So if for TDA, that's mostly the transit agencies, if for some reason we weren't able to meet our projections, we do have a health reserve that we could dip into. So again, like Jim mentioned earlier, we've had a very strong 2 years, 9% last year. We're at 22% this year, but going for next year, we're being fairly conservative at just less than a 1%. So, we take into account, we don't want to get too excited about where the revenues are going. We also hear potentially that there could be inflation. So I think we're being fairly conservative, but that being said, we do have some reserves in TDA and Transnet. Basically, the recipients do get what we receive, and then we'll make adjustments needed in the following year.
And my understanding is that there's checks and balances throughout the process, that if there is anything that needs to come back to the committee or to the board, that will take place.
Yes, just like we're coming today and we're adjusting upwards. If we needed to, we'd come back and adjust downward and tap into reserves if necessary.
Yeah. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other questions? All right, I'm going to go ahead and ask the clerk to call the vote.
Thank you very much. The San Diego County Regional Airport Authority is absent. For the City of San Diego, Vice Chair Campillo.
I vote yes.
Thank you. For the County of San Diego, Chair Vargas.
Vargas, yes.
Thank you. For East County, Councilmember Mendoza.
Yes.
Thank you. Metropolitan Transit System is absent. For North County Coastal, Councilmember Zito.
Zito, yes.
Thank you. For North County Inland, Mayor Ritter.
Ritter, yes.
Thank you. For North County Transit District, Councilmember Bat Patel.
Yes.
Thank you. For the Port of San Diego, Commissioner Naranjo.
Naranjo, yes.
Thank you. And for South County, Councilmember Sankey.
Sankey, yes.
Thank you. And that item passes unanimously with those members present.
Thank you very much. Our next item is item number 7 is the freight planning updates 2021 San Diego and Imperial County's Freight Gateway Study and San Diego and Imperial County's Sustainable Freight Implementation Strategy. I'm going to call on Ms. Carrie Robinson to present on this item.
Great, thank you, Chair Vargas. Could you pull up the presentation, please?
You can actually see it. Oh yeah, there you go.
Oh, perfect, thank you. Well, good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Carrie Robinson, and I'm a Senior Goods Movement Planner at SANDAG. I'll be presenting this freight planning update item today with Tim Garrett and Mariela Rodriguez, who are on the SANDAG Goods Movement team. Next slide, please. As you heard in the previous presentation, the movement of goods is an important component to our national economy, and at the local level directly impacts our transit funds. Today, we want to provide a quick overview of 3 timely freight topics, including recent freight issues and how the federal and state governments are developing plans and policies that will influence our regional freight planning efforts, the recently completed San Diego and Imperial County's Freight Gateway Study, which is part of the 2021 Regional Plan, and the San Diego and Imperial County's Sustainable Freight Strategy, an effort that just kicked off and is funded by a Caltrans planning grant. Next slide, please. There's not a day that goes by that we don't hear about supply chains. Recent news reports have centered on the delays from backed up supply chains, such as the Ever Given ship temporarily halting trade through the Suez Canal, and recent delays at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Others have focused on the increase of trade during the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly with e-commerce growing significantly in the last 2 years. Both topics highlight the need for public agencies to plan and coordinate with freight owners and operators for these supply chains to operate efficiently. Next slide, please. Due to these supply chain issues, freight is a renewed priority for federal and state governments. At the federal and state levels, there have been recent executive orders focusing on building supply chain resiliency. Both levels of government have also developed freight plans that highlight the need to invest in freight infrastructure that enhances our economies while minimizing environmental impacts. The freight vision and goals found within these plans are incorporated into our 2021 regional plan. To accelerate freight improvements, the Investment, Infrastructure, and Jobs Act, or IIJA for short, includes $80 billion in funding for multimodal freight projects over the next 5 years. Of that $80 billion, $30 billion is slated for existing programs carried over from the FAST Act, and $50 billion is for new multimodal programs. The state will also dedicate funding to freight projects with the Senate Bill 1 Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. We will know the upcoming funding amounts for this program soon. SANDAG will work with our regional partners to ensure our regional priority freight projects can capitalize on these funds. Next slide, please. Now that we've gone over the recent federal and state freight updates, we wanted to discuss our regional freight efforts. We will be discussing 2 efforts. The first study was recently completed and provides details into our region's freight flows. And the second will provide a vision for implementing sustainable freight projects in our region. With that, I'll pass it along to Tim Garrett, who will present the San Diego and Imperial Counties Freight Gateway Study update. Next slide, please.
Thank you. As Carrie alluded to, supply chains rely on a multimodal transportation network to move goods. Gateway Study Update took a fresh look at the existing freight assets that form a network supporting goods movement throughout Southern California, Baja California, and beyond. The network is composed of freight corridors, including interregional roadways, rail lines, and pipelines, and freight gateways, including seaports, land ports of entry, airports, and manufacturing and warehouse clusters. The dominant supply chains depicted in this illustration handle a variety of products, with examples in San Diego and Imperial counties, including audiovisual equipment, automotive components, medical supplies, wind turbines, produce, and aerospace and navigation equipment. Next slide, please. Here's another look at our gateways and corridors, highlighting highways in pink and purple and railroads in dark gray. The SANDAG travel model forecasts increased truck flows on highways for the year 2050, especially on our major interregional corridors. These increases justify improvements to our railroads, especially the Lausanne Rail Corridor, to handle bulk commodities that would be feasible to transport via rail, in addition to more sustainable goods movement technologies and practices to reduce emissions and other negative impacts. Next slide, please. Goods movement through our gateways is of national importance, with international trading goods consistently accounting for about 20% of gross domestic product. The Otay Mesa and Calexico East ports of entry handle a significant amount of this trade. Otay Mesa is the busiest truck crossing in California and second busiest on the US-Mexico border overall, with more than 1 million northbound trucks and $48 billion of trade value in 2019. Next slide, please. These are freight forecasts from the Gateway Study by international gateway type for the year 2050, with the dark blue, pink, and purple bars representing conservative, midpoint, and aggressive forecasts respectively. We expect to see immense growth in trade through our maritime and land ports of entry, supporting the SANDAG priority project of a new Otay Mesa East border crossing to facilitate this growing freight volume. Next slide, please. The Gateway Study data highlights international, interregional, and regional relationships. However, we know that there is a current gap in securing localized data that would capture last mile movements and deliveries. We also know that the situation is ever changing, especially with increases in e-commerce accelerated by the pandemic. The e-commerce share of total retail sales nationally rose from about 16% to 21% between 2019 and 2020. And this has caused companies to change their business models to accommodate customer expectations of speedy residential deliveries. The study took an initial look at these and other emerging freight trends, including the shift towards zero-emission technologies. As we plan to accommodate the continuation of these trends at the local level, it will be necessary to build and maintain relationships with cities, modal agencies, and freight-adjacent communities while incorporating newly available sources of freight data for analysis. Next slide, please. We have so far covered the federal and state freight updates, as well as the Gateway Study update. This study was completed in November 2021 and was included in the 2021 regional plan. Now I'll pass it over to Mariela Rodriguez, who will introduce our new project, the San Diego and Imperial Counties Sustainable Freight Implementation Strategy. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Tim. California has established ambitious climate, air quality, and public health goals, and has recently prioritized transitioning the freight sector to sustainable technologies. The freight sector is an important economic engine, as Tim described earlier in this presentation, but it is also a major source of greenhouse gas emissions and pollutants. To ensure that San Diego and Imperial counties meet and exceed these goals, SANDAG and the Imperial County Transportation Commission will develop a sustainable freight strategy to systematically implement multimodal freight projects and policies that will transition San Diego and Imperial counties to a more sustainable, equitable, and economically competitive freight transportation system. The strategy will develop and strengthen partnerships between public agencies, community members, and the private sector through extensive collaboration and input to develop the strategy. It will also address environmental justice concerns from freight impacts by incorporating input from our region's disadvantaged communities through the public outreach efforts. It will also seek to pilot innovative technologies that might be the first in the nation, and identify federal, state, and other funding sources for implementation. It would also address workforce gaps in implementing new technologies by creating a workforce development toolkit. Next slide, please. The project was kicked off last week, and it's an 18-month-long effort. Throughout the project, the team will present our findings to other policy committees and working groups. We plan to come back to present the final strategy to the Transportation Committee next year in December, but we'll also be happy to come back earlier to present other milestones. Next slide, please. That concludes our presentation. We want to thank you all for your time, and we welcome comments or questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any public comments on this item? I think we have two.
Thank you, Chair. We do have a few public comments. Tim Bilash, you can go ahead with your comments when you're ready, and Tim will be followed by Mike Bullock.
Good morning, committee. Thank you for taking my comments. Thank you for this presentation and the others. I just was wondering, in the presentation, there was a description of increases in freight traffic for different components in the county. I saw that there did not appear to be, although it's a small amount anyway, of freight traffic through the airports in San Diego County. I'm aware that the county supervisors are considering the expansion of the Palomar Airport up in the Oceanside area. And one of the issues is that there are Federal Express facilities up there. And the question for me is, will there be road traffic between the two airports or north-south counties needed in addition to the increases indicated in the report? And that airport expansion is somewhat controversial in Palomar. And so how does that relate to the San Diego trafficking for freight for future projections? I may have missed it in the report and was wondering if that's been considered. Thank you for taking my comment.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker will be Mike Bullock. Mike, you can go ahead when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that we all know that the most efficient way to move freight in terms of tons per unit energy is on the water, on ships on the water. They're slow, but it is the most efficient way in terms of using energy. And next is rail, and the last is on the highway. And so those are three competing modes from, say, Northern California, points north and down to where we are. And so I think it would be interesting to see how much freight is going by each of those three different modes, just to categorize it in that way. My other comment is that people may know that I have done a paper showing how cars, light duty vehicles can achieve the 80% down by 2030 below our 1990 level. And, you know, it's very rapid electrification, and then it's some enforceable measures. So that's a little bit off topic, but it's just that very same thing needs to be done for freight. And, you know, I haven't looked at that at all. That's not my focus, but it needs to be somebody's focus. How is it going to come about that the energy that the greenhouse gas we put into the atmosphere from moving freight is going to be 80% less than it was in 1990? Now you can say that, well, these various categories don't all have to meet the target, and that's true. But if they're large contributors, and certainly light duty vehicles is the largest, and the freight is probably right up there. You know, generation of electricity is next, and every single category like that has to, well, the total overall has to be 80% below 1990 levels. We have to take our survival seriously in all of these categories, and freight is very interesting. And it's just that I didn't hear any words about that specifically. I heard the word sustainable, you know, which is good, but we should have a plan showing how we can achieve. Of course, we don't have it for cars either. I mean, CARB has no plan. California has no plan. The federal government has no plan with cars. And that's something that we need. If you don't have a plan to succeed, what you have is a plan to fail. And that's what bothers me mostly. Thank you.
Thank you, and Chair, that concludes the public comments.
Thank you. Are there any member comments on this item?
Madam
Mr. Hall?
Yes. Could you help me? How much does the freight or the tonnage of freight go up between now and 2050?
Can we pull up the presentation, please? Can we go back a few slides? Probably around slide 9. Oh, let's see, let me make sure. I'm sorry, Mayor Hall, were you asking tonnage in general, or were you asking for specific?
No, I'm asking all told tonnage coming through the port, coming across the border, how much increase in freight tonnage that we have to move through this county between now and 2050? How much does that go up over today's number?
We will have to calculate that for you. Apologize, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I'm hoping this chart can show you at least kind of for each mode at least, kind of what that assumption is from the 2019 baseline, which is shown in that light blue color. And then you can kind of see the different assumptions here for 2050. But again, it's broken down by mode, so we would have to calculate that in total.
So I'm not, I haven't had a chance to really study the slide. So what percentage do you perceive of that tonnage will go by rail, and what percentage of that tonnage do you believe will go by truck?
We'll also have to calculate that for you, but we can definitely do that. So apologies, I don't have that answer right now, but we will get that for you.
Okay, and then with, in our new RENA numbers, about 170,000 new residential units, which represents probably about 1.4 million trips a day. Do we calculate, like was spoken before, about the light freight that runs throughout the region? And do we have any idea what that represents?
It's a really good question. So the data that we used for the study, most of it came from the freight analysis framework, which is from the federal government. So it's looking more at interregional freight flows. So right now there is a lack of data for looking at really the last mile delivery side. I do know that SANDAG is looking to do additional work, I believe this year, to get more information on the more localized freight data. But that revolves around basically doing a lot of surveys with different companies. It's hard to get that information.
And the reason I just make mention or give you these questions, I mean, that all has to go towards infrastructure and making sure we have that infrastructure in place. So then my next question is, what capacity is left where they load and unload the trains in San Diego?
For that question, we'll actually have to reach out to BNSF. That's regarding their operations, and they would have the most up-to-date numbers.
So, okay, and just, I've seen those numbers from SANDAG before, so it's kind of amazing to me we don't have them today, so.
Well, likely we do, but
so what I would like to encourage any of the board members, especially the presentations are provided with enough time. If you have any detailed technical questions, feel free to reach out to staff and we can get those for you. And then of course, you are always welcome to ask those questions during the public meetings, because just if you are having these questions, I'm sure some of the members of the public are asking, but in fairness to staff, it's always great to be able to ask those questions prior to, so that they have that documentation in front of you. But what we will do is we'll make sure that those questions are shared with staff, and then we can bring them back at the next meeting so that we can make sure that everybody has them. How about that?
Yeah, and I apologize. I probably should have done that. But in the past, they were always part of the presentation. So it's kind of, to me, seeing the presentation today without them, I've just raised a question.
No problem. It's just, I think it's good so that we don't put staff on the spot trying to figure out where all the data is. They're doing a lot of great work and a lot of information. And so I want to make sure that they are prepared in these meetings and they can bring all the information that they need. And I know they have it because they are exceptional at what they do. So thank you for all those great questions. Gustavo.
Thank you, Chair Vargas. Carrie, thank you. Great presentation. And Tim, just two quick comments. One is, I'm sure that this study that is going to take place over the next 18 months will take into consideration the designation of the Port of San Diego as an HM5 port, which was done late last year, and goes a long way in this designation goes a long way into looking for federal funding, as well as bringing in more freight in a sustainable way through the port. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. And the second one is also as part of the stakeholders in this study, the transportation officials in Baja California. They have expressed interest in bringing more goods through our ports instead of through the land port of entry. So I'm sure that you're going to be including them as part of the stakeholders that are going to be part of that study. So those are my two comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Director.
Councilmember Saki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Gustavo, for reminding everybody about the binational focus of a lot of the trade that happens here in San Diego. At the Borders Committee, we get regular reports about goods passing both directions at our border. The excitement over the OTI 2 that was expressed earlier in the remarks, Gustavo, is also shared by an awful lot of people who watch the border. I want to focus my remarks on rail. My first question is, as we've looked at the Losan corridor as so important, have we also identified some sort of urgency message or some sort of reminder to the bigger decision makers about the need to get those rails off the bluffs. The future of and stability of that trade corridor, as well as the safety of the passenger traveling that route, is hugely important, and dedicating some effort to creating more urgency around moving that off the bluff would be helpful. And these seems like these studies, or the future studies coming up, would have an opportunity to do that. Second, the Ducati rail line is sort of a low-hanging fruit. It's got a presidential permit. It needs some work, that's for sure. But one of the public speakers, I think, identified the economic benefits as well as the environmental benefits of travel by rail. And as Gustavo suggested, perhaps the Port of Ensenada or other ports south could move for freight north, and we could use the sea as well. But the rail opportunity that Ducati crossing represents shouldn't go unnoticed, and would hopefully become part of the discussion going forward. So a little bit about Lausanne and moving the tracks, and then a little bit about Ducati, if you could, please.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Zicki. So for the Lausanne question, yes, we will be including that in the sustainable freight strategy. I know SANDAG's been making efforts on doing that analysis too, and that's with our rail team. So they have more additional details regarding that, but definitely that would be included in this strategy. And we would be looking likely in addition, obviously, to any of the environmental impacts by moving it inland or reducing those impacts. We'd also look at the economic benefits too. So, and then to your question regarding the desert line, we would also be including that project as well. I know there have been some efforts on trying to seek funds for doing additional studies and looking at the feasibility again on that rail line. So that would be a separate effort, but we would definitely want to include that project in the sustainable freight strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much as well.
Thank you. Member Naranjo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is more specifically about addressing the environmental justice concerns. So if you guys can break it down for me on how that approach will be and how that would be addressed, and what is the specific plan to move forward?
Sure, thank you. I'll take the first stab at that, and then Mariella, if you want to jump in too, feel free. But with the sustainable freight strategy, there's going to be a huge component of public outreach and really targeting our disadvantaged communities in San Diego and Imperial counties. So one of the first efforts we'll be presenting at the SANDAG Social Equity Working Group. But in addition to that, we'll be also presenting at our Freight Stakeholders Working Group. And we're hoping that we can add members from the AB 617 communities into those. Oh, I know some of them are already in the Social Equity Working Group, but for those that might not be, at least in the Freight Stakeholders Working Group. And there's going to be a public outreach plan that would be developed and would really outline that strategy. So that effort will be in the next few months that we're developing that public outreach effort. And we're happy to share those details regarding that and kind of that strategy. And Mariella, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
I think you covered everything that we are doing for the outreach efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I look forward to seeing the public outreach plan. I also sit on the AB 617 steering committee as well. So definitely happy to collaborate. And I definitely look forward to seeing not just the outreach and just hearing the input from residents that will be mostly impacted, but also having that vision and trust on how we can actually do, do things that would actually improve the quality of life. So I think that would be the next step. So we'd love to see how that would be outlined and how that would be coordinated with the public outreach plan.
Perfect. We'll definitely share that with you and welcome any comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Senke, do you still have a question, or is that from your hand from before?
No, that's left over. Sorry about that.
No problem. Any other member comments? All right, seeing none, thank you for that wonderful presentation. I did just want to mention that sustainable, this is a wonderful, wonderful presentation. The sustainable freight strategy is very important to me and to my district, and I just have several frontline environmental justice communities, and I think as Member Naranjo mentioned, who actually lives in my district and who is the representative for the port as well, both of these communities have major freight impacts in the portside EJ communities, Barrio Logan and West National City and San Diego International Border, EJ communities, including San Isidro and Otay Mesa. So these communities have census tracts, I think everybody knows this, that have asthma rates that are 3 to 8 times higher than other communities in San Diego County, and the impacts from diesel particulates in the Barrio Logan adjacent to the port is at the top 5% of the state of California. 80% is coming from medium and heavy duty trucks that visit the port. For Otay Mesa cross-border trade and industry is massive, and we have to advance cleaner infrastructure to reduce impacts. And as Councilmember Saki mentioned and others have mentioned, we are extremely excited. And I was actually in Washington, D.C. this last weekend, advocating absolutely for sure for our expansion of East Otay Mesa too. Very, very excited about that, but I want to make sure that our communities are healthy as we're doing this. And so I am have the honor of chairing APCD and is my newly appointed to CARB. I want to make sure that we continue to monitor air quality and developing community emission reduction plans, and that these plans are developed in collaboration with community stakeholders and regional partners like SANDAG and Caltrans, our cities, and with industry. And I believe it takes actions from every government agency to step up and bring forward implementation strategies like this one. I do want to share that we are going to be having our first joint SANDAG with APCD, meaning we're going to be hosting our first public joint workshop as agencies on March 8th from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And so as members, you will all be invited to join, and that's going to happen March 8th. Like I mentioned, more information is going to be forthcoming on that. And then I also know that the Portside community also has a plan that they've approved with APCD and CARB in October 2021. And I think it was mentioned during the report earlier today that in my first motion as a CARB member, I made the motion on February 10th for the board to select our border communities to develop its own plan. As a major part of our understanding our border emissions will come from understanding our freight movement. And finally, at the county, we're actively developing goals to reduce GHG and identifying the pathways to move away from fossil fuels through our decarbonization framework. And so the final plan coming to the Board of Supervisors in August of this year. And so I'm encouraged, and I continue to have collaboration with SANDAG and the county. And so I'm really looking forward to additional updates on this item and to collaborate on more implementation. The information, I think that the strategy that we're going to be providing is critical to address our climate, air quality, and public health goals. So I am thrilled about the work that we all are doing together. So with that, our next Transportation Committee meeting is scheduled for Friday, March 4th at 9 a.m. And we are officially adjourned. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the staff and everyone for doing such a great job. And I hope everybody had a wonderful Valentine's and you have a great holiday weekend if you have the Monday off. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome.
Take care, everybody. Thanks, Nora.
Thank you, Madam Chair.